let me now turn the floor to our paper giver. As I said, the paper will only be available over the coming weeks. Paper giver is Professor Jüergen Scheffran from the University of Hamburg, who is a professor of integrative geography and who has a specific interest on resource conflict, on the relationship between climate change and security. So it will take us a little bit more specifically to the topic of this year's forum, which is really the nexus between conflict and climate change in a Mediterranean context this afternoon. Professor Scheffran, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak in your important and timely forum. Let me open my presentation. I hope you can see everything. Okay, I'm speaking about work we have been doing in our research group, Climate Change and Security, over the past decade. And the Mediterranean region has always been a major focus of our research. As you see from some of the activities that we have been involved in, for instance, the Climate Security Dialogue series with the German Foreign Ministry 10 years ago, also the science and diplomacy activities that we did in some countries in the region, and also workshops with young students that were working on climate change and renewable energy projects. The work is focusing on so-called climate security hotspots all over the world. Climate change is a global phenomenon, but the implications are regionally quite different. In some regions, we have high temperature and high drought and water problems. In other areas, like in South Asia, East Asia, we have storms and flood events. And the Arctic region is experiencing a warming which affects ecological as well as social system and conflict. Particularly affected is the African continent and the Sahel zone, as well as Northern Africa and the Mediterranean region, as well as Middle Eastern countries, which is the main focus here, where we experience drought, desertification. Let me then look at the region itself. We have usually dry conditions, which are aggravated by climate change, which leads to water and food problems in this region. We have effects on major river systems like the Nile River or the Jordan River, and it can aggravate conflict in these river systems. We have also the interaction with the ocean because of sea level rise. It can affect delta regions like the Nile Delta and can contribute to coral bleaching in some parts of the ocean. And finally, we have the issues of political stability and economic dependence on agriculture, which is under pressure because of desertification processes. So this is a wide range of multiple security issues, human security largely, but also possibly national and international security. And since the region have similar problems, there's also opportunity for collaboration. So this is a region which is prone to many conflicts traditionally at the intersection of the continents. It's a very complex geopolitical landscape with interest of regional, local, as well as global actors. Just to mention the interest in fossil fuels. We have hard security issues, including real wars and between some of the actors, but also soft security issues like environmental change and economic problems, development issues, which interfere with hard security problems. Climate vulnerability is traditionally high and will be further aggravated because of additional exposure by climate change and the sensitivity of the region. The question is whether adaptive capacity can be strengthened to improve the situation for environmental security and avoid risk multiplier effects of climate change. to make sure that this region is not drifting apart because of climatic change, but rather offers opportunities for dealing with these problems in a collaborative way. Water security is something I will address, as well as environmental migration and forced displacement associated with the consequences of climate change as well as conflict. Now, when you look at this graph that we did 2 times, one in 2 publications, 2012 and 2020, where we just compared the adaptive capacity and the sensitivity of 5 of the countries in Northern Africa to climatic change. And we see a comparison, a change between 2012 and 2018 in 6 indicators of vulnerability and sensitivity. One is human development, one is GDP per capita for each of the countries, then education, and then 3 indicators that measure the independence of agriculture from rain, the independence of labor from agriculture, and the independence of GDP from agriculture, because agriculture is usually one of the parts of the economy that's sensitive to climatic change. And you see, usually there has been not too much change in this 6-7 years, but there has been some improvement, for instance, in Egypt, in GDP, as well as in other countries have been some improvement, except Libya, because of the conflict, armed conflict in this area. And we see, for instance, that Egypt is a country that's the most independent of agriculture from rain because of the dependence of the Nile River water. This is some difference. Morocco, for instance, is one of the countries that is strongly dependent on agriculture, and can be seen as a benefit, but also as a risk for this country. Now we have seen instabilities in the last 10 years since the so-called Arab Spring emerged in early 2011, which led to large movements in some of the Arabic countries, and some of the governments were overthrown. And there has been a lot of discussion and speculation about the role of climate change as a possible cause and driver of this movement, because of the dependence of food price, of the international food price, which is shown on the left below, which had shown the fluctuations in the years before. The economic crisis in 2008 had a strong effect on the food price, as well as the developments in 2010. And there were some major droughts in China, Russia, and other countries, or wheat producing countries, which had an effect on the international food price. And this region is a strong importer of food, which affect then the particular poor parts of the population, which were dissatisfied with their governments, and then took part in these protest movements, which escalated around the whole sphere. The Syrian civil war is somehow related to this. Many political as well as economic reasons, particularly the policies of the administration. But there was also an event before the Syrian civil war, which was the major drought in this Fertile Crescent region, which affected Syria particularly and moved rural people away from the area to a significant degree. And so there have been some publications making the argument that these uprooted people took part in the protest and against the Syrian government. And others, however, question this. They say maybe the drought had an effect, but other factors are more important, in particular the political and economic conditions, as well as the role of terrorist movements and others in Syria, which had a more significant effect. I do not deny the role of climate change, but see this as more as a minor factor. And since then, there has been discussion, what is the effect of climate change on such conflicts? Now, another issue that's related with these conflicts, as both Arabic Spring as well as the Syrian civil war has the increase of migration movements, refugees and displaced people, partly from other parts of Africa, partly also from the conflicts in Middle Eastern countries, which were moving to Europe either on the sea route or on the land route, and contributed to the so-called migration crisis in 2015. This debate was also related to climate change because there had been a long discussion whether climate change could be a driver of human migration and forced displacement all over the world. And some researchers made the argument that it was already an indicator, this crisis, to a possible link to climate change. And the discussion is how many people might be affected in the future by climate change, in particular in the Mediterranean region. So some say it's on the order of hundreds of millions, but that would be an increase by a factor of 10 compared to the currently 25 million people because of natural disasters. So some scientists also more cautious to not exaggerate the role of climate change here. They see a role, but how much? This is always the question. How much is climate change already, and how much will it be in the future? That is a difference because we have 1 degree temperature change now globally, but in the future we speak of 3 or 4 degrees, and that may have an effect also on migration movements. And the question is on how to deal with this issue of migration movements. It's probably not a good advice to build military force against the migration movements and build fences, but rather try to act preventively and address the problem in a way that minimizes security responses and security risk, and work with the countries between the countries of origin and the countries of destination of migration in a cooperative way, and together with the diaspora networks, include them also to find possible solutions. And this is something that has been presented yesterday. I was involved in this report by the German government, the Commission on the Root Causes of Displacement, which presented its report yesterday afternoon. It's supported by the German Ministry of Development. And it's a more than 200-page report. At this point, we have the short summary translated, which you can download from this website. This is thinking about how to deal with human displacement and irregular migration, and it's with the direct causes such as conflict and persecution, as well as failing governments and state institutions and the lack of economic and social prospects. Also deals with indirect causes like demographic pressure and environmental degradation and climate change. This is where the link to our panel is the most relevant. And finally, how it influences the routes and destination along the pathway, including the reintegration systems and the smuggling networks for migrations. In the fields of actions, there were 15 recommendations, policy recommendations in this report, both on preventing crisis, securing livelihoods, halting climate change, supporting displaced people, and managing Germany's response to this in the European context. I just single out the recommendations from the support on climate change that suggests that avoid the main cause of climate migrants is, of course, avoid climate change. And here Germany, as well as other industrialized countries, can work together to enforce their efforts to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. And but do this not only among the industrialized countries, but also together with countries in the global south, and assist them with climate smart transformation, which includes technology transfer, which includes knowledge exchange, and also a collaboration between people, which is called climate matching between North and South. That is an effort that could be strengthened to avoid the climate displacement. The second is strengthen climate change adaptation to prevent the forced displacement and avoid that people are moving into vulnerable areas and help them in this regard. And finally, the third point is about sustainable urban development, both in North and South, and avoid refugee camps. So improving the living conditions is, of course, always a good advice, and ensure good governance, protect the environment. So these are major issues that are relevant in this regard. Now, making some arguments on why climate diplomacy is important, and peace building in the Mediterranean region is, of course, avoid the and limit the geopolitical consequences of climate change through cooperation and peace-building mechanisms. And each region can develop and use its strength. Europe can bring in its advanced economies and technical capabilities and political institutions. And the countries in the Middle East and Africa can bring in their availability of resources, including solar energy and land resources, and also the work potential into this equation for cooperation. The main purpose is, of course, prevent climate change and its negative effects, to overcome the obstacles of cooperation, which, of course, conflict in this region is often an obstacle to cooperation. So this needs to be addressed at its source. Also develop shared spaces for collaboration and avoid the securitization of climate change. I think that this is very important. It would not really help if every country develops military force against the risks and consequences of climate change. This would only aggravate the problem. We should move from a vicious cycle to a virtuous cycle and to strengthen a positive nexus of the problems, problem avoidance, rather than the negative nexus. And we can develop synergies in the water, energy, and food nexus, rather than the negative nexus. So this is a very important device. And in a publication some years ago, we were discussing the factors that are affecting peace building, which is both on the side of environmental security and deals with the protection of the natural resources and avoid the scarcity becoming a security issue, as well as resilience building as a contribution to peace building, which includes the socio-economic dimensions for resilience building, and strengthen the capabilities of communities as an important contribution. And I think many more pathways between environmental security, resilience, and peace building can be strengthened in the future. I want to give only two examples. One is the diaspora activities in some countries, like has been done by diaspora networks in Morocco. So these are organizations that are living in Europe, but help families at home and the communities at home with the development projects. They are experts in this home country. It was developed in France to strengthen development projects and environmental projects for electrification, drinking water, irrigation, education, health, and also agriculture in Morocco, and the so-called program against drought to develop rainwater and irrigation systems in Morocco. I think more can be done to support these individual initiatives from diaspora networks on a root basis. Other activities for environmental peace building exist around the Mediterranean. I can only mention here one. It's a joint application for water security in the Palestinian Israeli-Jordanian context, the so-called EcoPeace Good Water Neighbor project. It's about conserving regional water resources and the water infrastructure by communities that are working together. And because they work together, it can be seen as a peace-building effort in the environmental field. And many more of these to build a resilient infrastructure that are needed for supporting the basic living of the people can be strengthened through network approaches between these groups. I would even say governments can give support for these activities. Whatever government it is, they can apply for projects doing these activities together and overcome the obstacles for sustainable water management, even in a conflict environment. Now, finally, I come to the point of fossil to renewable energy transition, which is, of course, for the whole region. We have heard in the previous talk how important that is to move away from the dependence solely on fossil fuels. And at this point, of course, the energy revenues are essential for the region for water and food imports, but it should not be in a singular dependence on these imports because it makes the region vulnerable to what happens on the international market. So some self-reliance in the region is important, and here renewable energy, which is very strong in the whole Mediterranean region, is essential because solar energy is available to a huge degree, and that can help stabilize the region to, in many ways, this energy cooperation and help the transformation. And as you may have seen these images about a network across the Mediterranean region in terms of renewable energy, bringing all parts of the region bring in their own strength. Europe has its own strength in renewables like wind and biomass and even water. And Northern Africa is very strong solar and wind, as well as the Middle Eastern countries, so that they could really collaborate if the conflict situation is addressed. But the question is, what is first? First, the solving environmental problems, or first solving conflict? Usually you can see this chicken egg problem has to be addressed at the same time. This is an opportunity to have many gains in security. Of course, it provides energy security for the whole region using this solar power. It brings also in climate security because of low carbon emission. It brings water security because it can help to transport water and build irrigation systems, use the energy from these renewables, and also socio-economic security by providing jobs and political stability. So that is basically the synergy effect that we could more work for and strengthen. At the political level, the governments have some structures established. Of course, originally it was the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership and the Union for the Mediterranean, which includes all the countries in this region, even though there have been some discussions, but the progress has been limited in implementing real projects, partly because of the divisions between these countries. Now, when we think about developing cooperation and joint initiatives that help to bridge the asymmetries in the region and make the stability, it's very important to develop multilateral cooperative. Even if not all countries are involved, it can be done bilaterally or with any other group of countries that try to integrate their development and build networking structures. The Euro-Mediterranean Partnership can be used. It has some issues like migration, health, energy, and water security and climate are part of their agenda, but it could be further strengthened, and other multilateral dialogues can be developed, like Planetary Security Initiative, the OSCE, NATO, and the United Nations can be serving as context. Now, okay, this can include also science. So science is, I think, a very important connector here in so-called science diplomacy, which I mentioned in the beginning. Science diplomacy can support climate diplomacy and help by providing ideas and solutions that can be implemented by the political and economic level in the sense of co-creation through collaboration, I would say. You see how it can work in this diagram, collaboration between Europe and MENA. Yeah, you have the different actors of both sides. They can form network structures between science, business, civil society, and across each other and with each other. And that's the challenge of the future, develop these network structures. And this is my last graph. You have here the 5 different types of actors: government, population, business, science, technology, and NGO in the MENA region and European Union. And here's some possible projects and linkages which they can jointly develop. Of course, governments play an important role, but also can work with business and science and NGOs and population, like, of course, official development assistance, and also remittances can be used by individual diaspora networks, and education of universities and creation of business and so on. So ideas are there. What is missing is the implementation, but I hope panels like this can help building structures for this purpose.